Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's story on the NPC Dungeon. As I promised last Friday, it will follow an old character. The first character that I really embodied and that I really got into, so he holds a very special place in my heart. And as I believe I also said last Friday, my memory is a little fuzzy for this one because it happened several years ago. So the format for this week's story is going to be a little bit different. It'll be several separate mini stories, and it will probably be a little bit more conversational and a little shorter than usual. I'll be more so explaining and talking about these events than I will be telling a story like I usually do. You may also know that I also post these episodes on YouTube, so if you're listening to this on YouTube, feel free to comment and let me know if you prefer this style of my previous storytelling stylings or if you prefer my other style. Either way, let's get into the story. So, what happened? First, for a little bit of context, my DM went a little off the books for this campaign. He decided to populate the world full of dinosaurs, which are actually in the book, but that's about where it stops. He included everything from ancient Colosseum-style gladiatorial arenas to more modern weapons and modern-day transportation like trucks. Needless to say, it made for some very interesting and frankly unforgettable gameplay. So, with all that out of the way, let's start from the beginning, as we probably should. Our characters, as characters often do, met in a tavern. Everyone else's character was already there, discussing among themselves and getting to know one another when the door burst open, nearly falling off its hinges in response to the enormous boot crashing into it. Everyone, obviously, looked over, surprised to see a truly gargantuan human, clad in a leotard, and dragging behind him a dead Pachycephalosaurus. The world is a big scary place, and everyone needs something that makes them feel safe. For Grutkar, the flying meatball, it was Stump, the animal companion. You can't see my air quotes, but I'm making big air quotes right now in the animal companion that he took along with him. He looked around, and then, without so much as a pause, he pulled out a small sphere from somewhere deep in his leotard and threw it to the ground. Exploding out in large letters in a puff of purple smoke and sparkles was the phrase, "Introducing Grutkar, the flying meatball." If you can't tell, he was a bit of an abandoned circus performer with a short fuse. And as this was in 3.5, where you could assign skills individually with skill points as opposed to having a set proficiency as it is in 5e, I dumped all of his skills in jumping, climbing, swimming, and other such physical skills, painting him as kind of an acrobat. I thought it'd be funny to have this gargantuan person jumping around and doing flips and such. But as these things often do, it only came into play once when they were trying to cross a bridge. The bridge was broken, so he jumped across it. That was it. But for now, let's look at Meatball's first weapon. For some reason, the party thought it wise to give him what appeared to be some kind of magical projectile launching weapon whose ammunition exploded on contact. The description would be obvious to someone like you or myself, but Meatball had no idea what this was. All he knew was that it was shiny and that he wanted it, and the fact that it went boom was even better. However, several collapsed buildings later, the party decided that it was probably wise to keep it away from Meatball. He tried to steal it back, but he wasn't the stealthiest. He tried to negotiate and bribe it back, but as you might have guessed, he wasn't the most convincing either. But he did end up becoming a kind of bank for the party. Somehow, don't ask me why they decided to trust him with their money. Either way, they eventually set him to go buy some healing potions for them. Healing potions, as you might have guessed, in this world are red, as they are in most other worlds. Meatball didn't understand this. He wanted yellow. So, the vendor sold him armfuls of an inert yellow liquid that did nothing but give off some kind of strong odor. You could probably guess what happened. His friends weren't very happy with him for obvious reasons, but it was funny, so they weren't too mad at him. Besides, he also bought a mysterious acidic black ooze. One of his favorite pranks included challenging people to a drinking contest using that ooze as the drink. Meatball could handle it, but most other people couldn't, needless to say. The party eventually needed to come in contact with a certain criminal syndicate. They found out this particular syndicate oversaw the operation of a prison in a nearby town. Upon arrival, Meatball had an idea. He reasoned flawlessly, might I add, that since this group runs a prison and that they need to talk to them, the best way to do so was to get arrested, obviously. And before the party could protest, he ripped the magical explodey stick from their grasp, fired it off at an abandoned building, and tackled an approaching guard. It took about 3 or 4 to hold him down, by the way. But they didn't carry him off to a prison. No, they carried him to a Colosseum, where he made friends with some of the other prisoners, fought a T-Rex, and, doing so, won an audience with one of the syndicate's highest-ranking members. As you might have guessed, he obviously insisted on carrying his dinosaur with him, and it raised more than a few eyebrows. When she asked him why, she being the high-ranking member of the syndicate, he simply said, "Name is Stump." "Why in all the planes of existence would you give it a name like that?" she asked as her face scrunched in confusion. Meatball responded with what is probably still one of my favorite bits of improv to this day: "Meatball walk in forest. Meatball need to think. Meatball sit on Stump to think. Stump croak, and Meatball turn around. Stumps don't croak." It was no Stump. Now Meatball sad. So Meatball carry friend. She looked at him, looked away, looked back at him. Okay. However, through the course of this conversation, it somehow struck her as a good idea to agree to act as his patron and even give him his own room. Meatball, completely forgetting his actual purpose for being there, refused, ripped off part of the wallpaper of the room, snuck back in with the rest of the prisoners, and used that wallpaper as a flag and a symbol of the life of luxury that he turned down to start his own rebellion against those who had imprisoned them. It was interesting. By the time his party came back to rescue him, he'd already broken himself out and even had his own army, an army that abandoned him the first chance they got. However, this same chaos-loving madman I just described was also the same one who frolicked through an open meadow upon completing their first quest and sacrificed himself at the end of the campaign for everyone else's sake. As I once said when the players called Meatball evil, Meatball isn't evil, Meatball is just misunderstood. But I have to say, my all-time favorite Meatball story was immediately after that, when they had to make a quick getaway. Remember the transportation that I mentioned earlier? Well, they'd found a boat, but Meatball accidentally broke it by pressing on the controls too hard, so they had to settle with a truck, and for obvious reasons they didn't trust Meatball enough to drive. And there wasn't enough room in the truck, so they had him set in the truck bed with his dead Pachycephalosaurus along with him. That potion vendor I mentioned earlier also comes into play. You see, Meatball didn't just buy the gross yellow liquid and the black ooze, he also bought a glowing red potion that he told absolutely no one about. Natural 20ing his check to figure out what it was, he instantly had a moment of brief intellect and realized that it was the perfect revive potion, and he had the perfect use for it. He poured it down Stump's throat and waited for the potion to take effect. It wasn't long before the thing stirred, shook its head, snapped its eyes, and snapped its jaws at Meatball, his own best friend. Meatball's own best friend, not Stump's. Meanwhile, the rest of the party sat in the car, driving along, completely oblivious to the emotional turmoil going on immediately behind them. Meatball and Stump fought in the back of the truck, the rest of the party none the wiser. The two clashed back and forth until Meatball eventually had to make a choice. He bashed the thing's head in, putting it down, and resigning himself to carrying around a dead Pachycephalosaurus with him once again. And that's it for this week's story. I hope you enjoyed it despite the different format. Feel free to check out this week's other episode. It goes over keeping the game running smoothly from the DM's point of view this time. Also, be sure to come back next Friday where I'll finish off the Bonk story and talk a little bit more about immersing your players into the game. I already have one episode on this topic and 3 more about Bonk, so feel free to check out those as well. As always, you can find this show pretty much wherever you get your podcasts and at the NPC Dungeon YouTube channel. So, until next time, let's learn something.